Kayla.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
So I was fine this morning. And as the
Oh,
day went on, it was just like when I picked my kids up from specials, they were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I feel fine." It's literally my voice.
You know what? What at the doctor's, this lady was talking about this fog that she saw when she was walking. Like, I don't know if you have allergies, but she said it was like really, really, it's starting already. So you might want to do some
Right.
nose spray and some stuff.
Yeah, all the things.
Yeah. All right. So let's start by chatting about the chapter 6. So I really was just curious what you guys' experience was, and how, because it had a question in there about how a teacher, like as a teacher, how do we delicately bring up the topic of abuse? And I was just curious, like, have you guys ever had to bring up the topic of abuse in your classrooms? Because I've never personally had to bring up um the topic of abuse as a whole with a class. It's never been in the curriculum that we've used, but my friend in Ohio said that they're starting out a new curriculum, that there was a law passed in Ohio that they have to share with the students, that parents can opt out of, kind of like that fifth grade talk, but it's all along the abuse, sexual, emotional, and physical abuse that they share with the kids. So I was just wondering if you guys have ever had to bring that up with your kids or anything like that in your classrooms.
So it's funny that you say that because yesterday we had a staff meeting and our counselors were talking about the Aaron's Law
Yes, we're going to have a
that
meeting
is
about that too.
changing.
Okay.
And that's all like sexual abuse and stuff
Mm-hmm.
that the counselors are going to do lessons on now with everybody, every classroom. And so we used to opt out of it. I was kind of thinking that maybe that now we're having to do it because of the things that were happening at Harrison High School.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking maybe that is why we don't opt out anymore. Because we kind of probably need it.
Right.
But I feel like I haven't had a lot of experiences with it, but I think now that maybe we're gonna have these conversations that we're kind of being put into those situations now, you know?
Yeah.
in Clark County, and this is like, almost 15 years ago, but when I was first starting out, they did like good touch, bad touch, counseling lessons with our really young students. I was teaching kindergarten that year, and they were talking about, it was just, I think it's stuff that hopefully all parents are teaching their children, but not all parents are teaching their children these things. It was just like, if, these are inappropriate places, like if somebody touches you somewhere that your bathing suit covers, you should tell a trusted adult. And if they don't believe you, you should keep telling a trusted adult until somebody believes you.
So
And
how long ago was that you guys, when did you guys do that?
that was in Athens in like 2009, 2010.
Wow.
And no other district that I've been in since has done that, like, or at least at a school I've been at. So like my district in Virginia was very tiny. Like I can speak for the whole district. There was like
Mm-hmm.
3 schools in the whole county. But in Cobb, of course, it's a different story. Like just because our school doesn't do something, well, there's 60 something other elementary schools.
Mm-hmm.
But I know at our school, I know people have had to, make reports on abuse, but at this school so far in my 5 years there, I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have had to make reports at every other school I've been at prior. So I think it's a lot about the area and the, socioeconomic status and education level of the parents. But of course, we all know that these things do happen in affluent communities. These things do happen in educated families. And yeah,
So
I
when you were, that's so interesting that you were in Athens and still in Georgia, and that was something that was being taught, but that was not something that was ever being taught. Like I was in Fulton County in that at time, and there was never any conversations about that. I remember the only time besides my personal talking about that with my child with the girls was the pediatrician would bring it up. She
Mhm.
would, because they go to to do like something with the girl and like, just so you know, like I'm gonna do this and it's okay because I'm a trusted adult and having those conversations with them. But that has never been brought up ever in the classroom.
Yeah, that's the only experience that I ever have with it being taught to my students. And I remember thinking at the time, like, none of our parents opted out because these were not like super involved parents
Mhm.
that would even necessarily know how to go about opting out. But I think it was really important because I don't think those kids were necessarily being taught at home. And
Mhm.
that district had an extremely high rate of reports of abuse, like definitely those kids definitely needed that information.
Do you guys
Um,
see reports of like, do you see that? Like, does your school go over the reports? Like, I don't know that I've ever necessarily saw that Timber Ridge, a report that tells me how many students have had any type of abuse or anything. And
no, and I don't know if they don't share that because it's just like confidential information.
Mhm.
But yeah, I have no idea. Like the only times that I've known about reports is if like, I hear it directly
Mhm.
from somebody else, like because I'm involved with the child somehow, or, um, or sometimes our principal would say like, just so you guys know, we have made reports this year. Things do happen to kids at this school. You do still have to pay attention
Right.
because for so many kids at our school, that's not the case. Like I said, I've gone 5 years without
Mhm.
making a report. And so I think our principal just needs to remind us sometimes, like, just because most of our kids have food at home doesn't mean they
Mhm.
all have food at home. Just because most of our kids have, safety doesn't mean all of our kids have safety. And we just have
Mhm.
to be aware of that.
Have you guys heard anything, Lucy, about Aaron's Law?
No, and I was like, you guys have both had this come up at your school and we haven't yet. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if it's just like coming down the pipeline or I missed a memo or something. But
Have you guys been told about the like bullying
yes,
The parent
measures?
training.
Because
we
we got told at the same meeting with the bullying training also about Aaron's.
So
okay.
the
Ours
bullying
was
training
just the
is
bullying training.
ours is next, no, it's the 27th. But we did get something from our counselor today, that she wanted us to send out to the parents that was about, I'm trying to see if I can pull it up. But it was for parents to go to, and it had, like, they wanted us to put it on CTLS, and it was something for them to go to that had some, it was called Taming Technology Monster. It was something about taming the
The
technology.
cyberbullying.
Yeah, something about that, I think. I don't know. I didn't, I mean, it wasn't like, I guess it's like a learning that parents can go to find out about maybe that, because I do know that even in fourth grade, like that cyber group chat is started and they're not being kind to each other and they're doing things. And so I don't know if that's gonna be what it's gonna be about, but that is one thing that they are putting out, and it's kind of like a parent night. And from what I understand, and they get to go on and hear about how to control what that looks like in their children's lives.
I was
So,
gonna say, feeling like that this kind of education is more crucial for kids
mhm,
than it has been previously because really young kids are given access to smartphones, social media, and predators
mhm,
can get a hold of them, extort them, get inappropriate pictures of them really easily. And kids don't know what to do in that situation. And
exactly.
parents don't always know what to do in this situation. It's like you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know that you need to be preventing your kids from getting in these situations, then all of a sudden they could be in that situation and the parent doesn't know how to handle it.
Right. So you guys kind of touched on this, but so you have directly dealt with abuse in your classroom, Lucy. You said everywhere but where you're currently at.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've had reports. Lucy, Kayla, have you had any that you've directly had to deal
Not
with?
directly. A couple of coworkers in my grade level, but not me directly. And I tried to not really get the details because it wasn't really I don't know, abuse kind of gives me anxiety thinking about
Mm-hmm.
it, and I like fester on it almost. Reading this book was a little tough at parts because I started to get anxious with
Mm-hmm.
all of the physical abuse that was going on. Um, and plus it was one of those things like I wouldn't want to put another teacher in the situation to like share that information because it didn't have anything to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
But I have had coworkers that had to make reports. The issue that I've found is like people making these reports and then like you don't ever know what happens.
Right.
Like it, you hope that something does, um, but you will never know the outcome. And so I know that that was hard on my coworker that had it
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah. What about staff members? Have you guys ever dealt with having a staff member having to turn in a staff member?
Mm-mm.
I
We've
feel like
had
it would be really hard
we've
if
had a
it came in.
lot of issues with that in the past. Like there's been staff members that have been very inappropriate, not like physically, but like they're verbal, that we've had to turn in where like HR comes in and they have you recorded and you have to share your experience and whatnot. So it kind of brought me to that other question I was saying about like what do you think that we can expect from the district? I will tell you that they handled it extremely poorly. This coworker is still currently at our school. Um, so it was almost like the people that were really directly involved are like, what was the point of even bringing it up and going through such turmoil? Because like it's hard to like not like even though you're not supposed to talk about it, they knew who had said something because it was the only person they had spoken to. Um, so I don't know. It's kind of like what you're saying, Kayla, like you don't know what's happening. And it's the same with like this situation. Like we never knew what was happening. We just kind of assumed something would happen. And maybe behind the scenes something did, but that person is still just working at school. No changes have been made, still with kids, nothing. And
Yeah,
it's
I've also had a situation before. This was my very first year teaching. I was, like 22
mm-hmm,
and had talked to the counselor, and she helped me make this report because there was definite emotional abuse going on with this
mm-hmm,
child. And the saddest part was that it came back on the child. He
mm-hmm,
ended up in trouble because with his family because when the social workers show up at the house, they bring that they brought that back down on their child. And he came to school the next day and told me, I made a mistake. I told you that my dad is mean to me, but I was confused.
mm-hmm.
And that was heartbreaking.
Oh my gosh.
It was really heartbreaking.
Yeah. So you had turned in a situation and then it totally like backfired.
Mm-hmm. And I
Mhm.
hated that. I mean,
So did the
if I
person
had
that
to,
you reported ever get in trouble for this?
social work was involved.
Uh-huh.
The types of language that this person was using with a child were completely inexcusable. They thought they were toughening him up. Um, but I did try to explain. Not like you have that much clout with parents when you're in your early 20s and you're
Right.
not a parent yet, but did try to explain to the mom that, like tearing down a child does not make them tougher and stronger. It just
Right.
tears them down.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just an extremely difficult situation, though, like I just can remember it clearly, him saying I was confused and me hating that for him. Like, no, you're not confused. Your dad says inexcusably terrible things to you.
Yeah.
And, so Clark County had a lot of things on their plate. The social workers were clearly um dealing with more than they could handle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a kid the next year that we made multiple reports on. There was clearly something not okay in the house. And I remember walking into like up to my guidance counselor or our counselor's office to follow up, like had he talked with DFACS, and he was visibly upset. Like I thought he was about to start crying because they had told him that they were not going to go check on the child.
Oh my gosh.
And he was like, I am positive that this child is in danger. And
Mm-hmm.
they were like, well, we've got all these reports and we've got all these files, and his just isn't thick enough yet. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was a different world.
How long were you there?
I only taught there for 2 years, and then I moved to Virginia.
Okay.
But yeah, it was definitely just like, I mean, I think overall the toughest conditions that kids were experiencing, out of anywhere I've taught. And not all of Athens is like that. There's very well-to-do parts and there's very rough parts. And I think, it's like, a small county and municipal government that just
Mm-hmm.
had, not enough social workers to handle all of the kids that were in tough situations. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the case. Like you hear these stories about social workers that have too many kids on their caseload and kids fall through the cracks. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it happens way more often than it should, for sure. Did you guys, when you were reading in the book, did any, or in the chapter, did any books stick out to you? Like, I thought it was really interesting where they started the chapter off talking about Cinderella and child labor poverty. And then the Hansel and Gretel with the abandonment and child abuse, and Little Red Riding with bullying. I don't think I've ever as a child watched those stories and thought of that. Um, but, and I don't think my children, like even now, knowing that that's books that they have always read, like even like understand that. But I
It's almost
really love the book, Our Teacher is in a Wheelchair by Mary Powers. Have you guys ever read that?
I've never read that.
Such a good book.
I the like ones that you were just mentioning, it's almost like now through the lens that we are seeing now, we
Hmm.
see it and we're like, oh, okay, I can make the connection.
Yeah.
But without that, you're like you're not making that natural connection to,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean,
It,
I just feel like with little, like, and again, I'm speaking only from the kindergarten experience. So Kayla, with your older kids, you might see more of this, but I mean, my kids, I can kind of see sometimes there's a little girl gang that starts up where they're kind of like, there's three. So one will be mean to one or one will be mean to the other, and they kind of do it. But like, I don't think that they would grasp the concept if I tried to bring up like the concept of bullying, or anything like that. They're just way too little to grasp that. Um, so I just think they would think that in books like that, they're just being mean. Like they don't see such the damage that it does at their little age still.
I don't think that a lot of third graders do either.
Yeah.
Some of them might, um, depending on if they have older siblings, specifically older sisters. Um, but I don't always think that they know the repercussions of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like in third grade, I do have to explain that a little bit more and explaining like what you do hurts people and they remember it.
Right.
Um, because I think that that kind of, they're starting to realize that other things that other people say
Mm-hmm.
stick with them. But they're like teetering on the edge of making those connections, I feel like in third grade.
Right.
I also think like you were saying, Kayla, like talking to them is so important because they don't get it. Like when kids are uncomfortable with something, they will do that like nervous laughter, and that can
Mm-hmm.
very quickly turn into making fun of somebody if you don't stop them right there and explain okay, what you just saw was this, and why it happened is this, and also the way we handle it is not by laughing at the person. Like I know at our school, some of the, usually fourth and fifth graders are on the morning announcements
Mm-hmm.
doing the speaking parts. And they will try to put kids with speech IEPs on there to give them some confidence, like if they've mastered, like we have a child that has like a very noticeable stutter, but he's in fourth grade and he has been working so hard on it, and he does morning announcements occasionally, and it's like a huge deal for him and can be a big confidence booster. And luckily we're not, live in front of him, because some of my first graders were laughing the other morning. And again, I don't think it's because they're just like inherently mean children. They just are kind of like uncomfortable, curious. They don't really get what they're laughing at.
Yeah.
And so stopping them,
Uh-oh.
sorry, are y'all still there?
Yeah.
I don't know what just happened to my computer. The screen just went totally blank. But like stopping those kids and explaining like what's going on. Not everybody can speak the same way. For some people, this is more difficult. And when you laugh at that person, this is the impact that it can have on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it was a good teaching moment for them. And I was really glad that that child wasn't there to witness their laughter.
Right.
Um, but yeah, like you were saying, Kayla, I just don't think they realize the impact that their words and actions can have on other people, because they're still so, self-centered at this age.
And I think they see a lot of it at home. I think that, you see kids and they laugh and make fun of situations, but unfortunately, I think that's what they're seeing people do at home, which can make it really difficult.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes, like, if they've never even had a conversation about like people have different needs, and
Mhm.
some kids don't have the same abilities or their brain works differently. Like if they've just never had a conversation like that before, they interpret that behavior as like that kid's acting strange on purpose, or that kid's being silly,
Mhm.
versus knowing that it's just a difference and that other child can't control it or help it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so let's talk about the book. Oh my gosh, it was heavy. This
It
was definitely
was.
this was a hard one. I mean, it was like an easy read, but it was also a difficult read.
Kayla, I related to you saying that you were like getting anxiety about reading
Mm-hmm.
it, because I felt the same way. Like I was so convinced that like something awful was gonna happen to her, like worse than what already happened,
Mm-hmm.
that I felt like there were times that I did not want to keep reading it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to read this because it's getting worse and worse and worse. Like, what's gonna happen? Um,
And one of the parts that really like it made me very sad and anxious, but then parts of it also like brought me some joy because of the aftermath
Mm-hmm.
was when she forgot to clean the tools and she like was beating her with the hangers in front of the kids. And that was really hard to read for me. But then like the innocence of the little ones and that they were
Mm-hmm.
just like, leave her alone. And they were trying to defend her. Like we know the father always wanted to defend her and he did, but then almost like the little boys were like helping defend when he would come home and like yell at her for doing it, like they would help
Mm-hmm.
defend her. And so her having that support and like even innocent little kids who loved her and like looked at her like a mom.
Yeah.
uh, I thought that was like powerful to have the little kids being there for her and just not leaving her aside and making sure she was okay. And like they were so young, but they like,
Mm-hmm.
like what did that was abuse to the little kids, just like it was abuse to her because
Yeah.
they're watching it.
Yeah.
It was just horrible. It was horrible.
I think that the hardest part is, again, we talk about like, again, this is obviously not appropriate for our students in any way. But you also run into the fear of like some of the other stories we've read, obviously you talk about the emotional point, and there's definitely things within the story that you could feel affected by, because you don't know the situation that a child's gone through. But I definitely feel like this is a targeted audience for like maybe more of the high school,
Mhm.
to really grasp, especially what was happening when, you know, Carlitos was like coming at her. But I feel like that can be so triggering for people that could have gone through some type of abuse. Um, I don't know, like that was hard. I have personally gone through it. Um, and so being a victim myself of that made it very triggering. Like there was moments where I was like, I don't know that I can finish this story because I don't know, like if something happens, like it just, I ended up talking to my therapist. Like I just like, she's like, why do you, what is, I'm like, I'm just so triggered by this. Like, I don't know how I would have handled that with students. Like, I don't feel like I would have been able to kind of come across, you know, I don't know. It just triggered me, like majorly triggered me. Um, but I also felt like I wanted to read continually to find out what happened, because I wanted to make sure, like it was that I need to know she's okay. You know, like I got very empathetic with the character, and to find out what had happened with her. And I had to use the back of the book lots because I didn't understand half the, like I liked that they had the definitions, because I was like, I don't understand what that means. So then I'd have to like flip to the back and glossary and pronunciation guide and figure out what that was.
I didn't
Um,
discover that till the end.
yeah,
And I
I
was
was
like,
like,
oh,
well, I
okay.
was started Googling and I was like, I'm Googling this. And then I happened to have the book sitting and it kind of opened up to that. And I was like, oh, never mind. I don't need to Google that anymore. But you know, I just like, for some reason, and again, like I haven't gone like through some of the other stories, you know, I haven't gone through being a refugee, or I haven't gone through, um, things that other stories have gone through, like, you know, a death of a brother or anything like that. But this one was super triggering and just had a different weight to, you know, on my shoulders with it. So it was hard. It was a hard one for me.
Yeah, I thought it was very heavy at times. I was surprised how happily it ended.
Yeah.
Um, but it was interesting because that the like text chapter mentioned Cinderella, because I
Yes.
actually did think of Cinderella reading this, like, oh, she was like literally a princess at the end, kind of, you know.
Yes.
But like how she is, you know, made to do all the work and treated as not part of the family, and you know, how she feels like she has this like Stockholm syndrome, like love for them, and especially for the little boys, and feels like needed by them. And then she finally is able to, you know, like overcome the pull of that. I love the scene where they come back and try to get her back outside of the hotel, and she is able to just walk away from them.
Hmm.
But yeah, I thought there was a lot of like parallels to a Cinderella story. And
Yes.
almost in a like too good to be true kind of way. Like, I know this is based on a true story, which amazes me, because the power of somebody to be like that intelligent and that determined to rise out of that type of situation is definitely not typical, you know?
Hmm.
And really truly miraculous. So I
Yeah.
was kind of like relieved
Yeah.
with how things turned out, but also, yeah, like terrified through most of the book that something.
The amount of like, trying to think of the right word. Um, just the like hold that she had on her,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
she would make her like feel like she was important enough to eat with them, or make her feel like she was good enough for this. And when she would like relinquish some control, but then to turn back around and like take it back. And it was
Hmm.
just like a yo-yo effect, like back and forth of like, here's a little bit, nope, just kidding. And like, that's like mentally, I don't know many people who could go through that and be okay after, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really, lots of abandonment, like I can't imagine being a little girl and listening to your parents like state that they don't want you there. And again, like so graphic to the point, like the fleas and the lice that was biting at her ankles and just
I
I mean,
hate
like,
talking about lice. I was reading it like,
yeah. And you think about like how different, like in this world right now, like if a kid came and had bites all over their ankles, you'd be sending somebody out there to check on their life. Like, what was their lifestyle like? Why were they not safe and stuff like that? So it's just really crazy to think about, like the fact that there was not an option for somebody to protect her like that. Like that was kind of like she was born to have this future that looked the way it looked. Which was just absolutely gut wrenching. Like, I don't know. It had a really awesome ending, but it could have pivoted many, many ways. And I kept waiting for her to go back and get back together with, what was his name? What was the guy's name that wanted to marry
Oh,
her?
and it started with an A.
Antonio, was it
I
Antonio?
think it was Antonio.
Okay. I kept being like, okay, let's go. Like, like, you've been the queen now. He's going to show up to take you the ball. Like, I kept rooting for Antonio to come save the day, but he never came back into the picture.
I also thought it was like really amazing for her to realize like if she went with Antonio, she would just be back in the life that she didn't really want for herself, you
Yeah.
know? Like to realize that when you're 14 years old and you've had no guidance or teaching and like be able to understand that you have bigger dreams for yourself. Like the fact that she could even imagine that a bigger dream existed is
Yeah.
a miracle.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Do you think that like it was saying, do you think she ever forgave them? Like, I don't know. Like, do you think if it had like a sequel, like she would forgive
I
them? Like, would you forgive somebody like, how could you get to the point of forgiveness for that?
I think that she seemed like the type to do it for herself, not necessarily for them. She
Hmm.
seems like she had a good head on her shoulders to the sense of like not forget about what happened and not like ever allow them back and do that to her again.
Yeah.
But I think that she probably did for herself and able to in order to like move on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Would you be
Yeah.
able to forgive something like that?
With a lot of therapy
Yeah.
and a lot of for myself, I think that I would have to. Um, but I think it would also make me very aware to like never allow anybody to put me in those situations again.
Hmm.
Or, and I would be very cautious of like the loved ones in my life to
Hmm.
not be put in situations like that. So I think it would make me aware, but I think that I would have to somewhat like forgive for myself to put it to rest,
Yeah.
to like go on with my life and not live in like the past, if that
Right.
makes sense. Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting when, like, you know, her sister's husband, Santiago, is talking to her about her own father
Yeah.
and explaining to him, like, well, this is what his life was like growing up. This is what his father went through. This is
Yeah.
what he went through and saw. And I think she had this, it's like, and in that moment, I don't think that she necessarily forgave her dad, like, oh, well, it's okay that he did this awful thing to me, but more like, okay, I can kind of see why he would be doing this behavior and why he would be trying to gain power in any way he could that's, you know, not a healthy way to do so. But like the fact that she was able to get that perspective, I think shows, like you said, like she's not forgiving because she just wants to, like not because that behavior was ever okay, but because she knows that she is going to move past it and she's going to
Yeah.
move forward. So like I think that for her, forgiveness is not just a like, oh, that's okay, but like really thinking about, I can see where this came from. It's
Mm-hmm.
not okay, but I
Mm-hmm.
understand parts of this decision and I'm gonna move on from
Mm-hmm.
it.
So was her sister also like I got a little confused. Was her sister also a maid and took care of kids?
I think she is, but I don't think it was such an extreme situation for her sister. Like she came back to visit every month,
Mm-hmm.
and as far as I know, they actually paid her, and she wasn't basically, kidnapped in the
Yeah.
same way.
Yeah.
Still not like a really great situation for a child to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if there's like levels of, you know, bad and worse,
Yeah.
I do think it was a different situation, albeit not a great situation.
Yeah.
Maybe
What do
similar
you
to
think
the one.
the pivotal moment was for Virginia? Like, what do you think? Do you think it was her sister? Like, I don't know, I guess there were so many moments of her doing different things and standing up to be strong for herself. And I was like trying to think back and I'm like, what was the pivotal moment that she really decided I'm gonna not, because she kept going back in her head of like, I'm gonna potentially go back. I'm gonna potentially go back. So I was just wondering what you guys felt like. I felt like the pivotal moment was the inability to actually admit to her family that she was like going through some stuff and having that person to lean on. Because she didn't like run away. I mean, I feel like she could have potentially like run back to Antonio and gone that direction, but she ended up going back to that previous life, which at that point in that book, it didn't, we didn't know, was she going to continue with that lifestyle she'd come from? But then she, ended up going to school and doing all that. I mean, it was just wild. The book was wild.
Yeah, I think that having contact with her sister was a big thing because it allowed her to see that her family had not forgotten her and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't truly want to never see her again. But I think that for most of the time that she was living with the Doctorita and Nino Carlitos, that she felt she had nowhere else to go. She felt her
Yeah.
family didn't want her back. She felt that if she went back, also the allure of like not living in a flea infested hut was, understandably pretty powerful. Like it was easy for her to buy into that, like, look what I've given you, look
Mm-hmm.
what you have, you'll never have this if you go back. And for her to, you know, realize that in some ways the terrible situation that she was in afforded her opportunities that she
Mm-hmm.
never would have had otherwise, which is like the terrible irony of the whole thing. Like you're both better off and worse off in this situation.
Yeah.
Because it's not like she had a great life with her parents. Like,
Right. Well, I mean, and the things that her parents kind of said to her were also kind of emotionally abusive to her.
yeah.
Like, so I think that maybe she wouldn't get physically abused in the same way, but she was still getting emotionally abused and still like neglect, not on purpose, really,
Yeah.
but like the living conditions and things like you're right. She was in a catch-22 and she, as a kid, it's really hard to make those. It's hard to make catch-22 decisions as an adult, but like when you're a kid, do you really know? Especially a kid who, when she was really little and going, there were decisions like she couldn't read, so she wasn't as educated in knowing how to make a good decision.
Right.
So it was hard for her in a lot of ways to decide.
Right. I thought it was crazy how she was able to overcome so much and make so like make such a as such a young girl make such a change in her life, and saw the connections with being able to teach herself to read, as we saw in the other story. What was it, the little Lithuanian girl? Cannot
Words on
remember.
Fire.
Words on Fire. Like, both of these strong girls are teaching themselves the skills to be able to read and better their life. And I just thought it was so cool how, going through so much, she still had so much strength to leave all of it and go on a chance and live in a hotel. And I loved that the girls were so welcoming to her, because you don't always run into that. Um, Even when she became, honest with them about being a Longa and all that stuff. Like, I just thought that was such a good message. So there is some really negative to the book in other ways, but that message of inclusion at the end was so powerful.
Yes. And it also was like when she moved into the hotel, it was really nice that there was a man who was a father figure with her that
Mhm.
didn't try to do anything inappropriate to her. Like
Right.
that was to me like the most triggering part of the book too is
Mhm.
I was just so terrified of what was going to happen to her and yeah, getting out of that situation and finding like that there are people in the world that are good people after
Right.
being surrounded overwhelmingly by terrible people.
Right.
And just like those chance encounters with people that ended up changing her life, like when she sneaked across the roof terrace and went into the other apartment and called her sister there, how nice the mom of that family was to her. And um also, did you guys figure out what year was this book supposed to be set in? Because I don't know a lot about Ecuador, and I
I
don't
don't
know
either.
if MacGyver means that it was set in the 80s or if like we're watching MacGyver and the Ecuador is dubbed in Spanish like now, like how recent the setting of the story is.
I don't know. I was trying to figure that out. I was
But
reading. I mean, I would assume, like you were saying, I mean, the only logical thing you could think is MacGyver was popular back then. But I don't know, maybe it was I don't know. I don't
I
know
mean,
anything about it, but I just think it's crazy. And again, like, I'm naive to not know exactly what, the world looks like in other places, but I still just find it so crazy that these kids are just kind of slaved away and not able to go to school where anybody's aware of what their life's like at home. Like,
yeah.
and then you have these other two kids that are still living in this house. I don't
It
know.
says the
Yeah.
1980s when I Googled it.
Okay.
It is the
That's
19, yeah.
kind of what
Okay.
I thought based on like the fashion and the MacGyver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But I also know like, sometimes like an American show doesn't hit.
It's other places
Oh,
later.
yeah. So like, but I did kind of like her love of MacGyver was one of my favorite things in the book that like kept things a little bit light for me when she would be like, "Oh, I'm gonna booby trap with
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
plant,"
Yeah.
and like MacGyver would do. I thought that was really just like, made things a little less heavy for me as the reader. Um, but yeah, like that moment of calling her sister, I feel like was the most pivotal moment in the book because once her family knew where she was,
Hmm.
even though she was like, justifiably not really excited to go back with them after the things that she remembered from her early childhood, um, she still, I think, she had some roots back. She had options. She had somebody that knew where she was and cared what happened to her.
Hmm. Do you think it would have changed the book if it would have? I mean, I feel like, try to see how I'm trying to ask this. Do you think it would have been as interesting if it would have been like written back Like, and I mean, I guess you could connect this to slavery and stuff like that because it's essentially kind of the same thing, but I feel like it kind of reminds me of that movie. Um, what's it called? Where they're all taking care of little kids. What is that movie called? Where they all take care of the little kids and the people are really, really, really mean to them and they make them ride the bus for like miles and miles and walk in the rain. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I've seen it.
Gosh, I wish I could remember the name of this movie. But there was a movie that was produced about slavery and these people, these women that were going into these wealthy people's homes and they would take care of their children. And it was very graphic. Like I remember they would like hit them and hit them with belts and stuff if they ironed their shirts wrong. Or one time, one little girl that one of them was taking care of was potty training and she went potty in this wealthy person's yard and the little girl didn't get in trouble. The slave person had gotten like beat by the mother in front of all these people. And you could kind of see in the movie like people's reactions to like that's not right, but like I don't know my place to step in and say something. So, I just wonder like that store owner, I think she kept trying to pry to get some information out of her because it's like people notice this is not normal. Like, but it's also like they don't do anything to change it. Like, I can't imagine letting that child go back into that house when they like let her use that phone. Like, I don't, I just was waiting for him to like call the police or to involve somebody else, but there was never anybody else involved in these situations to
That
support.
was that was what got me too about like the mom of Blanca in the apartment next
Yeah.
door in the city like did because she clearly cared. She was clearly concerned. And that was kind of my curiosity behind the decade that it was set in.
Yes.
Um and also it's not like I know a lot about the current legal system in Ecuador, right? So like
Right.
I don't know what kind of child protection laws are on the books in Ecuador currently or in the 80s. So like is it that nobody calls the police because they weren't breaking the law and nobody's going to do anything about it? Is it because maybe it was against the law and still they don't think anybody's going to do anything about it, or was just this like common enough that people just looked the other way? I do also remember the scene where Santiago is like, what they did to you is illegal and you could probably press charges on them. And she was like, I don't
Yes.
want to do that. I just want to move on with my life.
Yes.
But so like clearly there were some laws that pertained. I just, yeah, like I think in remote villages, rural villages where there's such abject poverty that parents truly can't like provide for their children, like clearly the police are not going or social workers are not going into those villages and checking on these kids in any way or shape or form.
And did they think that since maybe they thought nothing was going to happen, that then them getting involved could make it worse for either her or themselves by involving themselves?
Mhm.
I know that fear stops a lot of people from stepping in when maybe they would otherwise, but like the fear of the unknown kind of keeps them from doing that sometimes.
I would really like to research like what you're saying, Lucy, and figure out like what did that look like? Like, was that just so common? And like, how much do you think her parents got for like they had to have been giving them like how did they get her? Like did they give him money?
They
I
kind
don't
of
think
alluded
it
to it, but they weren't never.
But they also alluded to the fact that she was going to be getting money to
I
work for
think
them.
that's why they did it. It's like, okay, we don't have to feed her anymore. We don't have to keep her in clothes anymore. They're going to pay her. She's going to come home every other weekend or every once a month, and she's going to bring this money with her. Like, I think that whole like sending your child off to be a maid was a pretty common arrangement for these
Hmm.
families in poverty. But I also, because her friend at the fancy school, they had like a 13-year-old girl as a maid in their house, and you know, it's just, I think it was a really common practice, but I don't think that the never paying her and never allowing her to go home was as common.
So
It's
I
hard to know.
wonder, part of me like wondered while I was reading that if maybe the parents did it out of love, like thinking that that would be a better life for her because they knew the situation of what their home life looked like. Like
I
maybe
think
deep down,
partly, like, they clearly didn't have enough food to go around.
right?
It's kind of both. Kind of like they kind of maybe saw it as like a win-win, like their better life for her, but also like less um pressure for us to, have another mouth to feed and another person to clothe. Like it's a little less work for them, but also thinking that their children are going to be taken care of and sought after and everything.
Right.
I'm sure they were assuming it would be like it was with their first child, like
Mm-hmm.
she came home pretty frequently and clearly continued to keep going home pretty frequently. And I guess they thought it was just going to be the same situation. But it is like, I mean, I have not known a lot of students. I don't think I've ever had any students from Ecuador, but I did have kids in Clark County that came from a particular state in Mexico where there was a lot of poverty. And so most of these kids had never lived before they came to Georgia in a house with anything but dirt floors. Like they had
Really?
been living in one room, dirt floor homes their entire lives. And if you live in a house with a dirt floor, like you don't mop, you don't have indoor plumbing, like the parents didn't know how to live. Like they all lived in the same mobile home community called Pine Woods. And there was like a Spanish library that they had, like the county put a Spanish library in this community, and there was like a group of nuns who did a lot of work with them because the parents didn't know how to like keep a house and kids clean by like normal USA standards. Like if you don't have indoor plumbing, you don't like bathe your kids in the winter because you're afraid that they'll catch a cold. But in Georgia, people notice really quickly if you're not bathing your kids for several weeks in the winter. So
Yeah.
the nuns would go in and teach the parents, like, okay, well, this is how you do it here. Like, these are the cleaning supplies that you use because it's different. And this is like how you need to bathe your kids here. And this is how you need to do laundry here because they just didn't know. They had no
Was it
idea.
they didn't know because they hadn't,
Because they'd never had a washing machine.
that's always how they lived.
They'd never had a house as nice as a single wide trailer from the 80s. Like this, the trailers that they are living in are not nice by any standards that like we would consider,
Mm-hmm.
but way nicer than what they came from. So they truly had no idea like how you do life that way.
So how much percentage would you say of your students was like that?
That particular mobile home community, like any class at our school had at least like 7 kids that lived in that
So
community.
how did the other kids react? I mean, did you have a, I don't know, that's just wild. So did you have another like group of kids that was like, I guess similar to this book, like well off and had like everything they would need, and then you had this super severe poverty of these students?
So in this, like in Clark County, that whole part of the county is really in poverty. So like all the schools in this cluster, basically like none of the kids were really well off. Like virtually the entire school was free lunch.
Wow.
Um, like I never had a kid that that had a family with enough money that they even needed to pay for reduced lunch.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas like at Nick and Jack, almost no kids get free lunch. Like, I don't know if we have really any, like, there's so few at our school. So yeah, like very, very different.
So then, oh, that's just wild to me.
Just like with Clark, there's areas in Clark County that are like that. And then there's Oconee
Mhm.
that's the well-off side of
Exactly.
the where that generally the same area.
And
But
like the north side of town and the east side of town have better schools than the south side of town and the west side of town.
So you definitely got a like ton of funding from the state.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, they're all like Title I schools and
Mm-hmm.
they're all getting funding. And we had a lot of kids that were considered migrant families. So they had a special like migrant student worker that came in to like check on them and make sure they had enough clothes and stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
had a little girl that year who like I knew that she had enough clothes, but they didn't have any like laundry facilities or
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know. I don't know if washing machines are that intuitive if you've never seen one before.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't know this is a thing, like, I need quarters and I need to take all my stuff to this place and wash the clothes if you've
Mm-hmm.
never done anything but wash them like in a river before, you know?
Mm-hmm. And then you have
So,
these families here that you hear that they pay somebody to send off and do their laundry for them. It's just absolutely bizarre to me.
yeah. But like some of the, like, you're talking about the flea infested house, like it wasn't that bad. Like there were not guinea pigs inside, but
Mm. Oh, that
there
was
were
too.
fleas. And I went into the family's home and I could feel the fleas crawling on me. And when I got home, I got in the shower and watched them jump off. And I
Oh, bless.
had a new perspective and appreciation
That's so
for,
sad.
yeah.
That's just so sad. That just breaks my heart. All right,
But
well, I'm gonna stop recording now.